Let me now introduce our keynote address speaker. It gives pleasure to introduce Professor Ian Scoones. Is joining us remotely from the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. So due to time, again, I'm just going to go very briefly through his biography. I was hoping that people, when they hear my voice, will be moving in quickly. So his biography: Prof. Scoones is a professor at the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex, trained as an ecologist. His work over the past 40 years, has focused on land and environmental change, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. He has conducted extensive research, especially in agro-pastoral systems. And maybe one of the more important things that I need to point out, he has led a global program called Pastres Program. And that program, through it, he's worked over 6 different countries and 3 continents. He has recently published a book that I would like you, maybe he's going to tell us more about it, that I would like you guys to buy. And today he will be speaking to us on competing narratives for livestock development and policy. Competing narratives for livestock development and policy, Prof. Scoones. We are honored to have you, sir. I hope you are able to put your slide, or can see your face now. Thank you. So we're really honored to have you with us, and I'm hoping you're able to share your slides. Any indication, Prof, if you can share your slide? Not as yet. We can't even hear him. Oh, we can't hear you yet. Okay, they're working on it, I hope. Okay, let's just maybe give it a moment while they're working on it. Maybe we'll keep on trying and maybe keep on saying something. We'll tell you once we hear you. We can't hear him trying to say something, but we can't hear him.
Can you hear me now?
There you go, yes. Now the next step is accessing your slides.
Yeah. So let me share slides. Can you see them?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. Then I leave the floor to you, sir.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And thank you, everyone, for coming back from the coffee break and coming to this session. And thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry I can't be there, probably just as well, because I've got an absolutely horrendous cold and cough. So if I splutter during this, that's all it is. So you're probably glad I'm not in the same room as you all. So I want to talk, as was said, about competing narratives, ways we talk about policy. And as you all know, livestock in general and extensive livestock producers and pastoralists in particular get an incredibly bad press around the world. These are deemed very often to be unviable livelihoods. They're destructive of the environment and climate and the root of conflicts, particularly in so-called communal settings. But I think narratives really matter, the ways we talk about the world, as they create pathways in policy. They stabilize facts. They're the basis for how interest groups lobby. Narratives are therefore at the center of the politics of policy, and this is why it's essential to interrogate them with solid, evidence-based research of the sort that's being done and being shared at this conference. We need to ask, what is the data that they're drawing from? What assumptions are being made? How do processes of aggregation, generalization work to exclude and marginalize? How are political, commercial, ideological interests being played out? And what are the implications for justice of adopting one type of a narrative over others? In the debate about livestock, the environment, and development more broadly, unpacking those dominant narratives, probing their frameworks, examining the power and politics at play is, I'd argue, really essential. And it's essential not just for social scientists, but for collaborations between natural scientists and social scientists engaging in policy debates about the future of grasslands. So that's what this talk is about, and I hope to show that the dominant narrative, pushed by a slightly bizarre coalition of interests involving high-tech philanthropists, large corporations, journalists, food campaigners, environmentalists, I'd say particularly in the West, but elsewhere as well, is often misplaced and problematic and can lead to particular forms of injustice. But I'd also want to argue more positively that there's an alternative narrative, a much more positive one, and much more relevant to the drylands, hills, and mountains where pastoralists across the world live. This requires understanding how extensive livestock keepers manage animals and make use of the environment in practice, and not get blinded by this dominant view. This is important because over half the world's land surface are rangelands, and this includes many millions of people producing livestock products for populations in some of the poorest, most marginalized parts of the world. So seeking out alternative narratives can support struggles for justice against this dominant framing that closes down options and limits opportunities. Alternative narratives lead to alternative pathways for policy and the possibilities, I think, of different type of livestock development. But it does require us all to confront bias, misinformation, and powerful interests with solid research. This was the focus of the European Research Council supported project that was mentioned just now in the introduction, and it was led by 6 fantastic PhD students and country partners. And we worked in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tunisia, India, China, and Italy, trying to define a new narrative for pastoralism and so new pathways for pastoral development. And I want to discuss 5 themes that emerge from this work very briefly. I want to compare the standard dominant narrative that I've introduced and that you're all familiar with, and a new narrative that emphasizes, in particular, variability in conditions and resulting uncertainties in knowledge. As I've said, narratives matter because they provide storylines that both define a problem in a particular way and describe solutions that follow. Reframing both the problem and so the solution pushes us to new ways of thinking and acting. I see this as a central task of engaged research, let's say, across social and natural sciences, uncovering, revealing what is often hidden or suppressed. But it's often very difficult to shift these bigger narratives, as we found over many, many years. Power relations, professional biases, institutional frameworks, social and cultural framings all intervene. To the 5 themes that make up a new narrative. Let's start with mobility. You know the standard narrative. Mobility of both people and livestock is disruptive, backward, unproductive, causes conflict, and so pastoralists should be settled, become modern, adopt a sedentary, civilized so-called way of life. But of course, research shows how mobility, whether that's long-scale nomadic forms of mobility and transhumance, or multi-paddock grazing and adaptive systems, is essential for making productive use of highly variable resources, whether through movement of grazing animals or people migrating, or often both together. Flexible mobility by people and animals should be facilitated, I would argue, not curtailed. Yes, mobility is constrained these days by a squeeze on land and resources, but ways of navigating these new conditions can be found and need to be found. As we saw across our sites, there's lots of innovation going on to sustain mobilities. For example, gaining intelligence about variable resources is enhanced by access to mobile phones and new forms of transport and so on. Movement of people away from pastoral areas doesn't mean the end of pastoralism, as sometimes is suggested, although questions of labour and management of livestock are key in many places. It may in fact mean more investment, say through remittances and new institutional innovations to allow for herd and flock management. And such relations are kept together by this mobility of people, of animals, of money, of resources, of knowledge, and much more. Therefore, mobility is essential and should be the cornerstone of pastoral development. and policy. Next, let's link to themes of land and environment, the major subject of the talks today. You again know that the standard narrative, rangelands are degraded through so-called overgrazing or overstocking, carrying capacities are being exceeded, resulting in desertification, that these rangelands are in need of restoration, such as through destocking and tree planting, a very particular Western colonial vision of a wild natural ecosystem. And therefore, we need more fixed management and tenure regimes to control use of land. Now, as you know, probably more than any other audience, these assumptions have been widely critiqued by rangeland ecologists and many others. Instead, we now know that rangelands are so-called open ecosystems. They're non-equilibrium systems where variability is inherent and mixed grass-tree combinations exist and are maintained by grazing and fire. For sure, degradation can happen, but in non-equilibrium systems, recovery is often very quick. Crucially, and related to this, pastoralism and its mobile forms support diverse ecosystem functions. This includes biodiversity protection through movement and seed dispersal, for example, connecting fragmented patches and key resources. And additionally, livestock use can regulate the risk of wildfires through grazing. And unlike industrial production, extensive livestock production doesn't use huge amounts of water for its production, mostly just variable rainfall. So along with many, many others, our research argued for a better appreciation of complex rangeland ecologies, non-linear, non-equilibrial, in need of management in very different ways to temperate systems. In terms of land use, this requires flexible, open, hybrid tenure regimes that are responsive to variability, allowing movement and negotiated access to key resources across a landscape mosaic. Third, I want to look at the contentious connection between livestock and climate. And again, you know that standard narrative about livestock and climate. This has taken hold in many public and policy and media circles. Livestock are seen as the big climate villain. But as with so many simplistic narratives where aggregate figures are bandied about and global tech fix solutions are proposed, there's a need to differentiate and to nuance, lest blanket responses emerge and injustices result. Of course, livestock emit methane, we know that, and we know that equally methane causes global heating. But different livestock systems have very different impacts. A contained industrial system of livestock production is just simply not the same as an extensive mobile pastoral system. The implications of pollution, total emissions, the potentials for carbon sequestration are just hugely contrasting. This is why aggregate statistics, say the 14.5% of emissions are due to livestock, are simply misleading. They hide the variation. And the claims of equivalence between cows and cars and even coal is simply just wrong. So in sum, I would argue we need a much more sophisticated debate that's disaggregated and nuanced. And that's where science, disaggregated science, based in particular places, is really urgently needed. Therefore, it's not the product, milk or meat, but it's the process of production, industrial versus mobile, extensive pastoral systems that matters. In contrast to industrial contained livestock systems, pastoralism and other extensive livestock production are essentially low impact systems, even with potentials for carbon sequestration. So lumping them together in these debates results in serious misunderstandings, serious injustices, and as ever, pastoralists lose out. The same applies to the debate about diet. For sure, in many parts of the world, reductions of meat and milk consumption are needed. Excess animal source foods in diets can be bad for you. We know this. Livestock production of certain forms can be a cruel, polluting form of production. But should this mean a mass switch to more plant-based diets or fake meats or industrially manufactured protein everywhere for everyone? Well, of course not. Animal source foods are vital for nutrition, not only available protein, but other micronutrients, vitamin A, B12, folates, calcium, iron, and so on. I could go on. And these are often lacking, crucially, in poorer, more vulnerable populations. Estimates suggest that 1 billion people are short of protein, while 1.6 billion are short of micronutrients. And this is concentrated in certain parts of the world, most notably South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Extensive livestock production, such as pastoralism, converts low-quality grazing, where alternative productive land uses like crop farming are not feasible, to high-quality food. This is, after all, what ruminants are good at, and the importance of animal-source foods must be central to a narrative about sustainable farming and the pathways that create it. Finally, in my 5, I want to look at markets. There's much interest in market development for livestock across the world. The argument is that to improve livelihoods, reduce the effects of drought, boost incomes and trade, pastoralists need to be incorporated into modern market systems through new investments. But the idea that pastoralists are resistant to markets is, of course, nonsense. Pastoralists have long been engaged with markets and trade, going back to the trans-Sahara trade routes of centuries ago. The often uncounted export of animals and other products from pastoral areas is huge, generating very large revenues. Pastoral markets are, of course, diverse. They're networked, they're nested, they're compatible with pastoral production systems and responsive, crucially, to variability and uncertainty. Which is why, of course, many of those fancy markets built with huge infrastructure and large investments built over the years exist as archaeological relics, testament to the failure of the standard narrative around markets. I could go on. The standard narratives, for example, around disasters and emergencies, humanitarian support, around conflict in pastoral areas, similarly have misleading, entrenched, dominant views that are not borne out by a more detailed, sophisticated analysis on the ground. Adding these together, then, a rather different view of pastoralism and extensive livestock production is suggested. So here's a quick summary of the 5 themes that I've touched on in this talk. I won't read them out, but they contrast the existing narrative on the left with elements of a new narrative and associated pathways of development along the lines I've discussed. Yes, of course, these contrasts are stylized and simplified, but I think you will notice how wherever you are in the world, including in Southern Africa, the conventional narratives tend to dominate, even amongst well-meaning, progressive activists, development practitioners, and policymakers. Despite the challenges to the old narrative by research and experience over many, many years, the drive to manage, plan, control still remain strong. Moving to a new narrative means understanding pastoralism as a productive modern system based on mobility, flexibility, adaptability, and embedded in the type of social arrangements and networks able to make use of variability in environments and more broadly, and live with and indeed from uncertainty. And so shifting the debate across these 5 themes, and indeed more that I've discussed, is crucial. The consequence, I'm afraid, of persisting with the old narrative is continued development failure and widespread injustice. And the implications of this are serious for many people in many places across the world. Now, luckily, there are plenty of resources from the Pastoralist Project that I mentioned and many others that are highlighted, some of them on this screen, that can help us work together to shift the narrative. And I think alliances with grassland scientists and ecologists is really crucial. It's important to do the, to do the detailed scientific work of the sort that we've been discussing, but we need to situate this within this broader discussion, lest we end up with policies that undermine the capacities of so-called communal area livestock systems, and indeed others, to respond to the type of challenges that are faced. I don't know whether you've discussed this already, but we're approaching the United Nations International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists next year. I hope Ikshan is there in the audience. And what's crucial in this year is together across the world that we begin to elaborate a new pathways actually plural, for livestock development, extensive livestock development, especially in pastoral areas, including across Southern Africa. And I think this is an essential task for us all. So I'll finish there, and I hope there are a little bit of time for discussion. I know you're running behind time. If you want more information, there are a couple of websites there, credits to the many photos also there. And I hope that was clear via the Zoom, and I will stop sharing so I can see you.
We really appreciate you leaving us with some time to discuss with you, and also maybe to make up for the lost time in these sessions. Colleagues, are there any questions for Prof? The opportunity for questions going once, okay.
Thanks. Thanks, Ian, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And it's an important point you're making, that we need to try and combat this narrative in the West that livestock are bad for the planet. And there's a lot of things that are not being considered. For example, if you take all the livestock off the rangelands, what are you going to do with the rangeland? You know, that's one key thing, because, you know, those rangelands are critical for biodiversity conservation. So, you know, if they're saying we must convert them to food production systems, then you plow up the land, you have a terrible effect on biodiversity, whereas livestock maintain these rangelands for biodiversity. So that's a key point. And then, and the other thing that the West is not understanding is what Fred Provenza is really promoting a lot, is the phytochemical diversity in the diets of animals on rangelands results in vastly different meat product to a feedlot system, plus environmentally different. You know, the feedlots need to bring in food, grow food elsewhere and all the rest, and then they're giving them a monospecific diet. And the natural rangelands give this highly diverse diet. The meat is much more healthy for human consumption, etc. So I don't know if you have some thoughts on how we try and educate the West on these sort of things.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think a crucial point that we haven't got over well enough is, as you say, the importance of these extensive systems for climate protection, biodiversity, and as you say, creating high quality meat, etc. And I think, you know, we need to offer that as an alternative, which is compatible with what a lot in the West and elites in the South as well want. They want high quality meat. They want to have biodiversity. They want to have climate mitigation. We all want those outcomes, and livestock systems in these integrated mobile contexts are a crucial way of doing that. And I think that's going to be a central argument of the International Year. So I very much hope the International Year will be able to feed that into the wider debates through the UN system.
Okay, thank you. There's another question there.
Thank you. I wondered if you had any examples of where policy has been able to overcome the barrier presented to mobility, so land tenure systems, to enable pastoralists and also, you know, other processes and animals to move over vast areas. Do you have any examples where, you know, because land has been cut up into all these little bits and tenures, and how do we allow these processes and across large areas?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important one. I mean, there are some nice examples. So, for example, the traditional movement pathways that pastoralists follow in Spain, for example, which are long transhumances between the coast and the Central Plains, are now protected by law, so that animals and people can move across these areas. And the arguments that were used to generate that were through solid pieces of science by the likes of Pablo Manzano and many others, that showed that this allowed for the distribution of seeds, the improvement of biodiversity, and indeed the connection of very increasingly fragmented landscapes in Europe. Another example is the new transfrontier arrangements for mobility across the Horn of Africa states, whereby the IGAD group in that part of Eastern Africa have got together and agreed that transhuman movements across states need to be facilitated, because it's not only the division of landscapes by fencing within countries, it's also the existence of international borders that prevent pastoralists moving. These borders are, of course, arbitrary. They were imposed through colonialism and are not compatible with the movement of animals and people in ways that maximize their use. And of course, conservationists have long argued through conservancy schemes that taking down fences through, the transfrontier parks and conservancy areas makes sense. If it makes sense for wild herbivores, it should make sense for domestic herbivores. So the same arguments need to be applied. Fencing can be used flexibly and supportively in multi-paddock management, but only in order to facilitate movement. Fencing that results in restrictions on movement results in concentrations of animals, degradation, and the lack of spin-off biodiversity and other benefits that flexible mobility allows.
Okay, thank you. There's one more chance. Yes, Tony.
Thanks. So we don't have that much pastoralism in South Africa, but something you hear often is that young people don't want to go into farming, especially extensive sort of livestock systems. So from your experiences, is that maybe a threat to pastoralism in other parts of Africa?
It certainly is, and it's certainly a threat in many, many parts of the world. I've just been in northeast Turkey, where movements of people out of pastoralism is challenging. But I think, there's a sort of narrative about, pastoralism is finished because young people don't want to become pastoralists, etc. Well, they may not want to become pastoralists in the way that their parents did, but actually young people, and we see this in many parts of the world, both in Africa and in Europe and elsewhere, new forms of pastoralism involving young people make use of technologies, make use of different niche products, for example, high value cheese and meat production, etc., etc. So different sets of business engagements with pastoralism can emerge, which can really attract younger people back into pastoral areas. So pastoralism has always changed. 300 years, it looked very different to 100 years ago, and 100 years hence, it will look different again. But as the first commentator said, the alternatives to rangelands don't really exist. You can't convert these places in ways that are just croplands, extensive croplands, without massive amounts of irrigation, which is, in places like South Africa, completely infeasible because of lack of available water. So this is by far the most productive form of land use in these settings. The opportunity cost of not having pastoralism in these lands is high. Increased wildfires, reduced biodiversity, bush encroachment, you name it, the consequence of not having pastoralism is high. So government programs, policy support, thinking through with young people what types of engagement in pastoralism make sense, market development around high value niche products. There's a whole suite of things that can be done to attract new forms of pastoralism and see the transition of pastoralism to different settings. And Just to comment, I mean, I use pastoralism in a broad sense. So, pastoralism involves the mobile use, the extensive mobile use of livestock across rangelands. But that does exist in South Africa and Southern Africa, although we don't tend to call it pastoralism in those regions. But I think there's so many commonalities that I think South Africans and Southern Africans should see themselves very much part of this wider debate about pastoralism more broadly.
Okay, Prof, thank you very much for making the time to come and share with us your insights. Unfortunately, this is all that we had time to discuss with you. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your presentation, and we've learned a lot from it. And we hope.
Great. No, well, thank you very much. And sorry I couldn't be with you.
Okay, thank you. So we're moving on to, let's give him first, yes. Thank you. So we're moving on now to our next speaker, who's going to be Professor Susi Vetter from University of Rhodes University. She is a professor of botany there. So she's going to say something about the effect of drought on communal livestock farmers in Msinga, here in KZN. Susi, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I feel like every Congress I'm in a different session. Sometimes it's fire, sometimes it's ecology. This time it's communal. I'll try for pastures maybe next time. So this is a paper on a study that Rory Alcock, Victoria Goodall, and I did a few years ago and published in our journal, looking at the effect of the 2015-2016 drought on communal livestock farmers in Msinga in KwaZulu-Natal. In the paper, we also touch on some of the earlier droughts, but there's not time for that now. Is there a secret to this? Yeah. So as Ian Scoones has introduced, rangeland systems, especially in semi-arid and arid areas, have to deal with a huge amount of uncertainty, and prime among that is uncertainty around the quantity and distribution of rainfall, and drought is a frequent and regular and innate occurrence in semi-arid and arid rangelands. Despite being an integral part of these systems, these droughts can nevertheless have severe ecological and economic consequences, especially because of a whole lot of other external pressures that Ian has described in his talk. And recovery after the drought, both of the vegetation and of the animals, and of course the people who own them, can be slow and difficult. And this is only predicted to get worse with climate change because it's going to get hotter, rainfall is going to become less predictable with more extreme events. And we've already seen some of this play out here in Southern Africa, where the mean annual temperatures are already increasing faster than the global average, and extreme rainfall events, both high and low, have increased in frequency. And here in KwaZulu-Natal, an analysis of rainfall data comparing the late 90s, early 2000s to the 70s has found that there has been a decline in rainfall and at the same time an increase in temperature. And this obviously puts a lot of stress on livestock and their owners. So what happens during a drought is that two things crucial for animals become unavailable. The one is drinking water, which cattle, sheep, and goats need, and the other is food, both grass and browse. And this then can lead to livestock mortality, especially during multi-year droughts. And this leads to serious economic loss, and especially because people are reluctant to sell, and by the time they realize that it's a good idea, it often becomes difficult and unfeasible. And this is exacerbated by not just the uncertainty in the weather itself, but also that we're still finding it very difficult to make accurate predictions that would help people make these decisions. Now, what has had not enough attention is the massive scale and importance of the small-scale farming sector and its livestock in Africa generally, but especially in South Africa. I think it's better recognized north of the Limpopo. In Africa as a whole, 90% of all agricultural production comes from small farms, including 75% of total livestock production. And in South Africa, Black farmers, most of whom would fall under the umbrella of communal farming, although this is changing, own something like 5.6 million cattle, or 41% of the national herd, and over 80% of goats. So these are important stakeholders in our agricultural economy. And we are also talking about a huge number of people who are directly affected by what happens. Despite this, there has been very little detailed work on drought impacts on communal livestock owners, how the livestock populations are affected when there are droughts, the socioeconomic impacts of this, and then also things like what factors contribute to a greater impact or perhaps better recovery, and whether livestock and their owners actually recover fully between the periodic droughts that happen, or whether there's a slow ratcheting down as if people don't recover. So in 2015, 2016, there was a really strong El Nino and there was a severe drought across Southern Africa. And this in many areas was made worse by high temperatures. So in South Africa, it's been documented the effects on agriculture were severe, including something like 15% loss of the national livestock herd. Farming debt massively increased. There was a huge cost of supplementary feed, but all of these data mostly apply to the commercial farming sector because very little data is in circulation around the effect of this 2015-2016 drought on communal farmers. And there's a lot of reasons for this, including the fact that our government has stepped back to a large extent from dipping, taking census data, and generating the data we need to understand these systems better. So in our study took place in the Msinga area in KwaZulu, in 2 municipalities and 20 dip tank areas within those. And it was based on detailed owner-by-owner goat and cattle census data collected by staff of the Mdukachani Rural Development Project that has been active in this area for several decades. And so this detailed census data we used to assess the severity of the losses during the drought. We also used the more recent data to look at whether herds had recovered to their pre-drought levels and how long that took. And then at the level of the dip tank, of which there were 20, we also wanted to see whether there was an influence of resource condition, whether it was considered to be eroded or degraded, or whether it was sourveld, bush, on the mortalities and recovery. Also whether livestock density had an effect, whether there was some kind of density-dependent effect that made mortalities higher and recovery slower. And at the level of individual herds, what the effect of herd size on losses and recovery was, and also whether there was an effect of inputs such as supplementary feed. And what we really try to tease out from this data and other sort of surrounding records is whether there's any factors that lead to things being better or worse and that could potentially be targeted by interventions. So to put the most recent drought into context, since 1975, which is the date range for which rainfall data are available, and there've been 3 major droughts in the area. 1979 to 82, very infamous early 1980s drought was the longest, and the cumulative deficit of rainfall was really severe. In 2003, there was a 1-year but extremely severe drought. And both these earlier droughts were documented from other data sources to have led to severe livestock losses. And then here we have the most recent one, 2015-2016, which again, led to quite a significant cumulative rainfall deficit. And it was followed by below average rain until 2018, early 2019. So what happened during this drought? So already in 2014, rain was below average, and government department reports from 2015 documented that the grass grazing areas were largely depleted by November 2015. So that was been the beginning of that summer season. And in the 2015-2016 period, 42% of cattle and 28% of goats died in the study area. If you're the owner of these livestock, that is really serious. Many households lost their entire cattle herds, 21% of them, And just shy of 9% of owners lost all their goats in the Tugela municipal area. And goat numbers declined, but fewer households lost their entire goat flocks. If you look at this table, this is the percentage of households owning cattle before the drought and after. And you can see the difference between the two municipalities. Tugela is former white-owned farms that were occupied by labor tenants and are now under land reform, but they're less densely populated. So the average herd size is bigger in Tugela. The mortality is lower as well. So this is cattle here and goats there. And cattle ownership among households went from 73% down to 67%. And in Msinga, it was from just shy of 50 to less than 40. So there was quite a significant, like, households actually losing all their livestock. And something similar is happening with goats, but a lot more households owned them to start with. And the change from before to after was a lot less. So Dukachani staff did some focus group interviews as part of us putting together the study to ask farmers what exactly happened during and after the drought. And the reports are that livestock started dying when areas that still had drinking water had all their grass depleted, and so livestock couldn't access water and forage at the same time. And then the females died first and then the young animals. Some owners started to buy bales of hay, but it was too late and not effective. Some crop residues were useful, but the only people along the Tugela River actually had access to those. And then by the time the owners tried to sell, the animals were in poor condition and it wasn't really an option. Rains then returned in 2016, but they stayed below average. There's also disease, and the springs and so on took long to recover. So it was still pretty miserable even in the years after the drought. And what recovery took place was due to births. So there wasn't, we asked if did people buy livestock in, and they didn't to boost their herds, although people did avoid as much as possible slaughtering or selling their own animals to allow their herds to recover. So very conveniently placed selfie of me. There we go. So the 2014 data, which is from before the drought, was only available for Msinga. And so it took some 8 years to finally get back to pre-drought levels. And Tugela, we can't be so sure, but the trend is very similar. Whereas with goats, there was a lot less drama. They recovered much more quickly. But apart from the numbers, the percentage of households owning stock continued to decline after the drought. But that's also tricky because of the way households are defined and dynamic. We then classified the different dip tank areas, or we sort of scored them according to their resource conditions. And so we did a PCA on a whole bunch of factors. And basically on the first axis, we go from low-lying, hotter, drier, bushier areas along the river to sow-felt areas up in the mountains. I'm going to eat in my question time, but I'm not going to be long. And then the second PC axis goes from overgrazed, eroded, densely populated to much less so. And we then tried to relate these and livestock densities to how things fared in the drought. And we didn't see much. Two things we picked up. The first was, so this is PCA1 score, and lambda is the change in livestock population from 1 year to the next in 2014 to 15, 16, 17, 18. The red dots are the areas that had above average or above the median stocking density. So they're the densely stocked areas. So there's not much going on, but in 2016, the densely stocked areas all had still declining populations. And the second thing we picked up, that areas with a low PC2 score, so those are the eroded and degraded areas, again, just in 2016, sorry, the data are not aligned, had a negative relationship. So basically the more eroded areas suffered greater rates of death. But it was only picked up in this 1 year and not elsewhere. And this is also why these kinds of effects are often really hard to demonstrate, because they're limited in space and time. The last thing we sort of found that I'm going to talk about here is that smaller herds suffered greater losses. Firstly, because out of a small herd, even one is already a higher percentage. The other thing is clear that livestock ownership is highly skewed. But it's certainly, you can see why people inclined to having bigger herds, because it certainly allows you to come out with more animals at the end of it all. And then there was little evidence that feeding helped, but interestingly, the amount of people that use supplementary feed increased in the years after the drought. So there's still surprisingly little knowledge about drought impacts on this communal livestock sector, and yet it's really important that we do because of climate change. Cattle were much more vulnerable than goats, slower to recover. Owners of larger herds with more resources are more resilient. None of this should really be surprising, but here it is. There was some evidence of density dependence and effect of resource condition, but it was limited in time and space. And it seems from this and the earlier droughts that the mortalities happen over quite a limited period of time when grazing near water runs out. And if we can get a better understanding of that, I think it might also help target some interventions such as supports to do some timely selling. So to conclude, to deal better with drought and longer term change, there's a lot we still have to do. We're going to be dealing with a world with less grass and more trees. These data suggest that there's a good case to be made for developing the goat sector. We need better forecasting and dissemination of this info. Mechanism for some strategic sales of less productive animals early in the drought to perhaps limit the losses that happen accidentally. And these interventions need to be tailored to different livestock owners, because men and women, wealthier and poorer, don't have the same options and constraints. And that's it. Thank you very much. And the paper is in the journal if you want to look more of the gory detail.
Thank you very much. Very informative, and we are very happy to see what is happening in Msinga. Fortunately, we do not have time to engage with you more. So our next speaker is going to be Gladness. No. It's going to be Gina Arena. Gina is going to be taking us through her research, and the title is starting as follows: from research to rangeland restoration. Then she's going to continue with the rest.
Thank you. You allow me just to figure out all the little buttons. Okay. Thank you. So it's been a while since I have stood before an academic audience, and even longer since I've been at a GSSA conference. So thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. I'm Gina Arena. I work for Conservation South Africa, and today I will be presenting on a paper that was published with my co-author Heidi Hawkins in the journal last year. I won't have time to go into great detail because I'd like to cover a little bit about some of the findings from the review, but then also present a case for how we are closing some of the research practice gap through Herding for Health. So the paper is available online. You're welcome to read it in detail. So we know that rangelands are under a lot of pressure from overgrazing and climate variability and development. And we also understand and know that rangelands are extremely essential for biodiversity, for ecosystem services, and for people and their livestock. We also know that grazing science has really significantly contributed. We understand a lot more about grazing systems today, but there is a little bit of a disconnect, or maybe it's quite a big disconnect still, between translating what we understand into real world complex landscapes such as communal areas. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But in celebration of the journal's 60th anniversary, we did an analysis of all of the research that focused on grazing, management and fire management on extensive rangelands between 1966 and 2023. And we basically just wanted to try and pick out some of the main themes and trends from the data, try to identify some research gaps, and then we made some recommendations about practices, which I won't cover today. So we just did our search through Google Scholar and Scopus. We limited our search using the terms grazing and management, and then we did a second search to include the word communal and grazing. And after sifting through all of the papers, we excluded the conference abstracts, presidential addresses, duplicates of papers, and also, of course, papers that focused on semi-cultivated or tamed ranges. And so we landed up with a total of 396 articles, and we ran natural language processing tools on the data. So we found that from the 396 articles, we have the research was conducted across almost 470 study sites across 25 countries, most of them in Africa, and about 90% of them from the SADC region. Interestingly, so the original research, most of it was actually conducted on working farms. So that was private owned farms and communal land, but the communal land component was really tiny. I think it was about 5% of this 258. And then some were conducted, there were experimental trials on research farms, and then a smaller number inside conservation areas. So some of the dominant themes that came out of our analysis indicated that rotational and continuous grazing have been very popular topics published in the journal. There was frequent focus on terms, or let's say the most frequently used terms, which is represented by these two graphs here, speak to production priorities. So things like stocking rates, forage production, felt condition, animal production. Before I go on, interestingly, some of the terms like biodiversity, climate, and indigenous knowledge were far less frequently used, and that's quite telling given our rangeland priorities today. And then of the grazing system approaches that we looked at, continuous grazing, rotational grazing, and burning practices occurred frequently in the higher counts of articles, but then they were also the most frequently cited papers. And this is in comparison to other systems like season-long grazing, herding, your high-density grazing systems, holistic management, and even pyrrhic herbivory. And if we look at the trends in those themes over time, we didn't find anything significant, but what I can say is that the continuous grazing, rotational grazing, and burning were consistently written about over time. And then what was more interesting to me was that, our emerging and perhaps highly contested approaches that you assign to high density grazing and also holistic management was less frequently written about. And then likewise, herding and pyrrhic herbivory, those only started to emerge in the literature from around the early 2000s, but they've also remained relatively low in the literature. So what is missing? So some key gaps that we identified, mainly we still have there's limited empirical study in communal rangelands, and I think that seems to be coming through in many people's talks from today. There is limited linkages between these topics in papers. So I can't remember the exact number, but there was a very small number of papers that actually looked at the impacts of grazing on biodiversity Of course, there are lots of studies that look at the impacts of grazing on plant species and species composition, floral composition, but in terms of fauna and other biodiversity types, very low. And then I wanted to highlight that, there are few studies, or at least, not a lot of empirical studies that actually show how some of the theories that we understand today are being applied in the more socio-ecologically complex landscapes like communal rangelands. And then one of the things that we do talk about in our paper is just how the evolution of these theories from early equilibrium ideas to non-equilibrium ideas and to socio-ecological systems today. State and transition models are very common, and adaptive management is widely promoted. And then we also, across the studies, we did note that there's consensus, there seems to be consensus among management goals, but these have tended to, of course, focus on optimizing carrying capacity, stocking rates, species composition, and animal production. But my question is, are these the same goals for communal rangelands? Responsive site-specific approaches are really important to have it in an adaptive management plan, as well as strong monitoring systems so that you can evaluate your impact and adaptively change as you go. So this brings me to the Herding for Health model. This is a community-driven livestock management model that is working to improve the rural livelihoods of people who live in and around protected areas. So the model is focusing on reviving traditional practices, integrating science into the way that they implement those practices, building capacity in communities, and working together to strengthen collective governance of rangelands. And the model is based on 4 pillars: healthy rangelands, healthy animals, thriving livelihoods, and good governance and policy. And the 4 pillars have actually been guided by the One Health approach. If you are familiar with it, or perhaps not, the One Health approach is basically a framework that is trying to achieve optimal health outcomes for humans, environment, and for animals. So Herding for Health is linking science and practice. It makes use of a lot of the knowledge that has been produced by people like you sitting in this room today, and as well as encouraging traditional practices or ways of knowing in the way that people manage their livestock in communal lands. We also incorporate nature-based solutions, things like bush thinning, erosion control, livestock management practices like implementing a herd health plan, a grazing plan, and even just introducing some more planned grazing in a system where perhaps there hasn't been planned grazing. Currently, the model is being implemented across 1 million hectares in 7 countries in Africa. It's located in and around these transfrontier conservation areas, and it has generated over $8 million in livestock value chain revenue. And this is my last slide. I'm running out of time. So some key takeaways. So our review of the 60 years of research by the journal has really significantly advanced our understanding and, of course, the grazing theory, but there seems to be still quite a lack of focus on communal rangelands. And so this is my call to action as an academic who now works in the NGO world. Herding for Health is presenting you with real-world systems where we can bridge science, traditional knowledge, and implementation. And so we have a lot of urgent priorities. We welcome academic interest and collaboration and research. And I probably don't have time for questions, but you are welcome to come chat to me in the breaks as well. I really encourage that. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you
Actually,
very
do I
much.
have-
No, you don't. Yeah,
Okay.
but thank you very much. Indeed. Thank you. So our next, first, let me thank you for your talk. Very interesting, very thought-provoking. There was something that you said, I felt like it was pregnant with meaning when you said something about the themes that were not being used. And then you said it's telling from the focus of the society or something like that, or the conference. Okay, the next speaker is going to be Gladness Mikateko Khoza. Gladness Mikateko Khoza is going to be saying something to us in relation to the correlating UAV-derived vegetation indices. I think this is more of a GIS or remote sensing kind of a study. So let's hear what she's going to share with us. I believe that your talk is going to be for 5 minutes. Yes, you're coming from the RC and in collaboration with the University of Pretoria. The floor is yours.
I can't really see anything, but thank you. As I've already been introduced, my name is Gladness, and I'll be presenting on correlating soil nutrient with UAV-based vegetation indices in a communal rangeland. So communal rangeland systems play an important role in sustaining livestock and ecological integrity, but they are often overgrazed and face nutrient deficiency. As a result, monitoring their nutrient status and its influence on vegetation health is very important for forage recovery and sustainable land management. The unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with multi-spec sensors offer a non-destructive high-resolution approach to detect spatial variability in vegetation condition and underlying soil nutrients. And then as a result, the aim of this study was to evaluate the relationship between UAV-derived vegetation indices and soil nitrogen content during the wet season. So our study area was the Thorndale village in Bushbuck Ridge, just outside the Kruger National Park, where we collected 48 soil samples, and we also flew the drone, and then we used the ET tool to derive the vegetation indices of NDVI, NDRE, SIRE, and GNDVI. And these indices were chosen because they are mostly sensitive to chlorophyll and the nitrogen. And for model development, we used the linear regression random forest and the support vector regression. And then these were the indices. And the indices, as you can see, they mostly have the green and the red space distribution. The red mostly shows soil and the low biomass areas, and then the green, which is mostly in patches, is the high biomass area, which mostly consisted of trees. And then the nitrogen distribution map this side, I showed that the area was mostly nutrient deficient, whereby we find that the nitrogen mostly ranged between 0.04 and 0.2%. And this area was just a small patch in the entire area where we found the nitrogen. And then the correlation analysis, I showed that our models mostly didn't perform well when I was correlating nitrogen with the individual and indices. Only it was this NDVI, which was the only exception. And this was to find out this is because most of these indices, sometimes they get saturated Then there's noise or soil background, and then they have limitations. But then now when we combined the indices, you see that on the linear regression and the random forest, these they improved, and then we saw that this is because when now you combine all these indices, things that are missed by the individual in an index are now be able to complement each other, and more spatial variations are able to be seen from these analysis. And also that from the area, since it's nutrient deficient, means that the indices, they sort of struggle whenever they are alone, unlike when they are together complementing each other. So to summarize, it shows that the correlations show that the indices can be used as proxies for estimating soil nitrogen in a communal rangeland, and nitrogen is more active in the wet season, making spectral responses stronger and more dictatable with the UAV's multispectral sensors. And the UAV multispec and machine learning are able to offer transformative tools for rangeland assessment. And then to conclude, I will say that these findings highlight the potential of UAV multispectral imagery combined with machine learning as powerful tools for estimating soil nitrogen levels in communal rangelands, especially during the wet season when vegetation indices show stronger spectral responses. Thank you.
Okay, just was saying, unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but it was a very interesting talk. And now we're going to move on to the next speaker, which is Nyiko Gift. And his nice title, Private Land, Public Value. Nice title, Private Land, Public Value. Then we'll continue with the rest of the topic.
Okay, I'm not visible as well. Can I, can I just take a stand on the side?
You can, but don't move away. Go.
I will just stand.
Yes. No, it's fine. Let's just do this. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Stand there.
Okay, now I can't. I know I'm the tallest person here. Okay, still waiting for my, yes. Okay, I can see everyone and everyone can see me. My name is Nyiko Mutileni. I am a plant ecologist and I am from Limpopo province. I work for an agricultural company called GSSA as an environmental scientist. Okay, 6 years back when I started working for GSSA, I never thought that I would be standing in front of you and talking about the potential of an agricultural company to contribute into conservation. You wonder, why does she say that? Maybe it's because my dream was to work for a conservation organization. Please hire me. But the reason is because agriculture stands at the center of one of the world's largest trade-offs. At one hand, it contributes to food security. It is very essential, one of the core SDGs. On the other hand, it is one of the leading drivers of biodiversity loss. And many scholars have written about this. But today, I'm not here to talk about that part. I am here to shift our focus towards viewing the large land that is managed by agriculture and try to see farmers as more than producers, but also as custodians of land, which has a potential to contribute into biodiversity conservation. Okay, I mentioned that I work for GSSA. I'm sorry, I didn't bring the tomatoes. Every time when I say I work for GSSA, we talk about tomatoes. GSSA is a family-owned company, largely based in Limpopo, province where I come from. However, it does have its operation across 4 other provinces in South Africa, as well as in Namibia. It is largely known for its tomato production because it's one of the largest tomato producing company in South Africa. Because of ZZ2's operational footprint, the management of ZZ2 has increasingly become aware of the impact or the potential impact, if I have to say, that they could have towards biodiversity. And this has led to a shift in mindset in which the management stopped viewing the company just as producers, but also as custodians of these ecological landscapes in which the business won't be successful without. Okay, when we talk about land use at ZZ2, one thing we need to take into account is that agricultural production or farming is one part in a larger landscape. Only 15% of ZZ2's land is intensively used for agriculture, and the rest is used for other uses that complements biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Okay, hopefully I'm still on time. And oh my. Okay, let me be faster. We did a little bit of an exercise to see like in which vegetation types do we operate. And we find that we operate in 25 of the 446 Southern Africa vegetation types. Hence, we do have an impact. And this showed us that our impact is not only limited within our farm boundaries, but also outside of the farm. So it is important for us to talk about biodiversity conservation. Okay, now let's talk about how we started this journey of stewardship. Biodiversity stewardship in a nutshell, basically it's volunteering a portion of land for conservation purposes. Nobody forces you. A private land or a public landowner can decide like this portion I'm setting aside for conservation. There is a various steps and there are different levels of commitment. The highest level is a nature reserve. In ZZ2, it started with my colleague, Viam Haddad, who was doing a master's at the time, and his supervisor student, Jazz, was doing also her PhD, and she suggested that this area has a potential for an application in a biodiversity stewardship. I wish I would say that the rest was history, but it was not. It was in 2015. There was a lot of discussion, and then we were introduced to Conservation Outcomes, which is an NGO that helped with the stewardship application. And then finally in 2017, that's where we submitted our first application. And I have to say, 2025, we are still waiting a bit. Okay, I will take you through one of our biodiversity stewardship areas, which is Mugezi area. And I'm getting nervous because I'm out of time, which is Mugezi area. This one is located 80 kilometers from Polokwane along the R81. And if we look at, which one is it? Oh dear. Okay, I did something. Oh, the laser. Okay, if we look at this way, the orange side, it's this. This is the stewardship sites, and the white side, it's the agriculture, where agricultural is happening, and the green sides, these are natural vegetations that act as corridor and contribute to connectivity. And basically this model is trying to show us that there is a potential for coexisting between conservation and agriculture. And also the area falls under strategic water catchment area. I won't go into details about that. These are the vegetation types, but for the sake of this, I'll talk about the critical endangered wood bush granite grassland, which is part of the stewardship area. And moving forward, and these are some of the critical endangered species that are found in there. What I can say about this grassland is that only less than 3% is still on its natural state, and we house some of its remnant. And what are the lessons? Okay, these are the lessons and these are the challenges. The lesson is that it is possible. The challenge is that it requires patience. So, thank you.
It is possible indeed, just requires patience. Our next speaker is going to be Mdiya Lwandiso. Mdiya Lwandiso is going to be talking to us about how predators influence small ruminants. Mdiya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good day, everyone. My name is Lwandiso Mdiya from the Department of the Sustainable Food System and Development at the University of the Free State, under Extension Department. I'm not the pasture scientist. All right. So my talk today is on how predatory animals influence small ruminants, grazing patterns, and communal rangeland utilization in the Eastern Cape. Next, okay. All right. So this is background information. Small ruminants are the most kept animals in the communal rangelands and have multiple functions, as we all know, for our rural livelihood. However, I'll try to be very fast. However, besides the common known threat of limited grazing forage, use insufficient land in communal areas and other factors, lately there's been a growing threat of predatory animals that attack and kill small ruminants, especially the weak ones or the kids. So the research gap for this study, in South Africa, for example, it remains unseen of as to, okay, for farmers, okay, in South Africa, it remains one of the primary challenges in confronting livestock farmers, and the issue holds both economical and environmental significance. Key livestock predators include caccal, black-backed jackals, and others are unknown from the study area. However, the most existing studies have concentrated mainly in the Karoo regions, not in Eastern Cape. If there are very few, and you find out there are only review papers that have focused in South Africa most of the time, not the use of primary data. There are few studies on livestock predation in the Eastern Cape province, yet small stock plays a pivotal role in communal rangelands for rural livelihood, and etc. So therefore, the study seeks to assess the extent to which livestock predation, of the livestock predation in the Eastern Cape. The study area was in one of the villages in Mthatha and Butterworth. So additionally, the study aims to assess or examine the impact or how predation influences livestock grazing patterns and rangeland utilization in these areas, along with the association of the cost implications involved in this. So to gain more insight in this, a survey of 83 livestock farmers in the Msinga was conducted in 2 villages. I'll try to skip one of the stuff. Okay. Okay, let me come here. So during our data collection, we've noticed that about 60% of the respondents say that they've been victims of predation for the past years. But some of the animal or wild animals that have killed their livestock have been dominated by jackals, and some of them have been unknown. And these wild animals, they mostly attack the lambs and the kids, especially the sheep and the goats, as I've mentioned. All right, on rangeland utilization, as we all know that we're going to talk about the communal rangelands here. So that means the livestock that are grazing freely in the communal land. So there's no exclusion or limit as to a number of animals each user can graze on the shared ranges. So about 90% of the respondents feel that there is no sufficient forage, especially during winter, for obvious reasons. There's evidence of shingling land, rangeland area due to to houses, because our population is growing. So people, they need land to build their houses. So about 55% of respondents had hired livestock herders, mostly from Lesotho, because of some of the reasons. It's because of what? Of this incident of the predation. Because they have to monitor and check everything that is happening on your livestock. Okay. So the impact on predation of predation on range utilization is well known that the livestock, especially in winter after harvesting, we leave our livestock there freely, unattended for what for good pastures to graze on our field. But because of this incident of the predation, now we have to hire people to guard our livestock because you don't know what might happen. There's stock theft as well that you have to look after as well. So unattended animals tend to graze closer to residents, which might cause conflict to villagers because they tend to what? To break in the, okay, sure. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. All right. So in conclusion, it seems that predatory animals are driving grazing animals closer to residential areas, leading to overgrazing and underutilization of what? Of the far parts of what? Of the rangelands, which might later cause what? Ecosystem imbalance. Let me just end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Jacobs and small ruminants. Our next speaker here, we are going to jump Unathi and go straight to Andiswa, and then we'll come back to Unathi after Andiswa has finished her part. This is the arrangement they've made between themselves, the two of them. Andiswa, your talk is going, Andiswa first is a researcher from the ARC, and she is going to be talking to us about integrating local knowledge into participatory approaches.
Floor is yours. Thank you. Let me show that I can see. Okay. Okay. Am I audible? Okay. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. As Ntutuko has introduced me, I'm Andiswa Finga from the ARC under Range and Forage Sciences, and I'll be presenting on integrating local knowledge into participatory approaches for sustainable rangeland management in Ata and Kukuka in the Eastern Cape. Okay, so Ata and Kukuka are villages that are situated in the Eastern Cape, which is mostly rural, and they are rich in indigenous and spatial knowledge systems. However, there is a breakdown in the functionality of this knowledge due to the aging farming population, reduced youth engagement, and as well as the weakened agricultural extension service. And this disruption in the knowledge flow has had a direct implication for sustainable management and productivity of the rangeland. And therefore, this study aims to find ways to revive traditional practices through inclusive structures, youth-led innovations, and strengthening of the extension services. So how we've done this is a study that is a build up from a study that was done for my PhD, and I worked with these communities. And over time, as I have mentioned some of the challenges, one of the challenges was also the lack of a structure or a structure for management of the rangeland. So we are trying to revitalize the management through establishment of community-based rangeland committees, participatory GIS and storytelling, as well as exploring youth innovation hubs and trying to find ways to embed extension services into the system. And some of the early outcomes, as you can see, that we have these degradation maps, the maps that we created with the farmers, and they just show areas where they have perceived or seen changes in terms of their grass species, changes in terms of more invasion of either black wattle or sweet thorn or other invasive plants, as well as also increase in terms of the erosion. And so we produce these maps, and we're also trying to strengthen youth involvement through innovative for the flow initiatives, which is what Unathi will maybe talk a little bit more about, as well as trying to operationalize the community-based management community committees, and also trying to slowly build the linkages between the community and the extension services or the extension officers, and also finding ways to integrate the indigenous knowledge with modern knowledge and modern technologies. And through that, we're hoping that we can inform policy. So in conclusion, we can say that the participatory approaches that have been implemented in these areas can revitalize the communal rangeland systems, and the Tata and the Kukuka examples are scalable models for blending indigenous knowledge, youth innovation, as well as local governance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sis Andy. Unfortunately, we still can't have a discussion with you, but you did your best to keep up to your time. Next speaker, last speaker is Sisi Unathi Gulwa. Unathi Gulwa is employed by the Department of Agriculture in the Eastern Cape, and she's going to be sharing with us farming futures. Then the rest of the title is going to come from her.
Good afternoon. I'm Unathi Gulwa. I'm working for the Eastern Cape Department of Agriculture. The title that I'm going to present here is part of the bigger study that has been presented by Dr. Finga. It's the collaboration study funded by NRF, collaboration between ARC, the Eastern Cape Department of Agriculture, and the University of Fort Hare. I won't go through my title. I'm sure everyone can see it for the sake of time. As I have said, it is part of the bigger study. For the purposes of this study, I'm only touching on the journey traveled so far at Amakhuzeni, near Alice in the Eastern Cape. Amakhuzeni is a communal area, and like many rural areas of South Africa, and in particular, the Eastern Cape has got great agricultural potential, but it's often facing challenges ranging from limited resources, poor infrastructure, climate change, of course. However, there's a strength in those communities because they are normally bound by strong communal bonds and willingness to engage in agricultural activities. So we employed the agricultural research for development and multi-stakeholder partnership approach to journey together with the farmers, starting from the beginning. So we started way back towards the end of 2023, if I remember, doing community engagement, introducing the project, and then until we got the buy-in from the farmers, then we started together. I am more presenting on the side of starting to identify and select the homestead gardens, and then planting and working together with the farmers. So this portion of introducing planted pastures under rain-fed conditions, we call it Sifunda Sonke, because we learn together with the farmers. So we are attempting to connect science to the real world. And also we are using this multi-actor collaboration to ensure relevance and adaptability and uptake. When we started, we ran, we started with workshops where we also invited other stakeholders like your agencies like the NYDA, where they came to present opportunities that can be entrepreneurial for youth who are in the village, because part of the reasons we are engaging on this journey is to try and bring back youth participation in agriculture. We work, of course, with farmers, so they are core researchers as well, because we are learning together. And then we also tap into their local knowledge or indigenous knowledge, and then we twine it together with our scientific research, and we're hoping to get impactful innovation. And we also do shared decision-making, and with the hope that it will improve the outcomes and ownership of the project when we are no longer there. In trying to address, of course, the systemic challenges that I had mentioned before, we embarked on workshops, mentoring, training, and also make sure that we put emphasis on the integration of youth and women in solution development. So starting from having identified the gardens, we work together with the communities as well as the students and lecturers from the University of Fort Hare. We do the planting together, and then in other days we'd come back and do field training to work with the farmers so that they can be able to identify and see the differences between the the summer and the winter pastures that we have planted with them. So we are these stakeholders that I have mentioned earlier, so I am not going to repeat, but besides us as DUNI, we are also working with the local extension officers. Starting from way back in the late 2023, this is where we are. This is sometime in late April or early May, where we have the planted pastures under rain-fed conditions, and we are continuing to collect data because there are students who are attached to this, and then we are sharing the knowledge with the community. That brings my presentation to the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Unathi. Unfortunately, we will not be having a chance to have a discussion with you on what you have just discussed with us. We will do that over lunch as we are about to conclude this session.